All right, hello and welcome to today's video, how to create a model service learning unit. Just before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover. This presentation today is a video presentation of a webinar that we gave earlier on this year. All of the resources that will be mentioned during this video are linked in the GSN discussion group, which is called How to Create a Model Service Learning Unit as well. So if you need to, you can just pull up any of those resources from the link in that discussion group. My name is Whitney McKinley, and I'm the Professional Development Manager Diversity Lead here at NYLC, and I will be leading the video today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. On our agenda for today, we are going to be reviewing the IPARD cycle and the backward design process. Then we will be moving into a brief discussion about investigation and linked curriculum and where to integrate those two steps. We'll then start looking at the planner itself and go into stage 1, which involves the big ideas. We will explore stage 2, which looks at how to integrate formative and summative assessments. And we will end with stage 3, which is really planning the service and academic activities for your instruction in the unit. By the end of today's video, participants should be able to use the academically rigorous service learning unit plan and IPARD cycle to create a service learning unit, integrate standards-based formative and summative assessments into your unit, and assess the quality of your unit using the self-assessment rubric. One quick piece of housekeeping before we jump into the presentation. You're going to see these little starbursts dispersed throughout the presentation. They note each of the 8 service learning high quality standards, and they'll just show you kind of in which sections of the planner you should be able to identify each specific standard. All right, to start off, for those of you who aren't familiar, the IPARD cycle is a process comprised of 6 stages that are shown on this slide. It starts with authentic investigation, in which teachers and students investigate community problems that they might potentially address. It then moves into planning and preparation, where teachers, students, and community members plan the learning and service activities and address the issues needed for a successful project. The third stage is action. This is usually considered the heart of the service learning project, where students will actually engage in the meaningful service experience, which helps them to develop the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will benefit their community. Stage 4 is the reflection portion. This can actually be integrated throughout the cycle, but it involves activities that help students understand the service learning experience and to think about its meaning and connection to them, their society, and what they have learned in school. Step 5 is the demonstration and celebration step. This is going to be directly linked to our summative assessment as we proceed talking about the unit planner. But it's also the final experience where the students, the community participants, and others publicly share what they have learned and then celebrate the results of that service project. And then in step 6, which is a recently added step, that's really where you're looking at sustaining the service learning experience. How can you take this experience deeper, look ahead to the future, and explore possibilities for integration either later in a new semester, in a new grade, or across curricular content. All right, for a brief overview of backward design, the idea of backward design is exactly what its name implies. Instead of starting off with the activities or the learning experiences, the practitioner is going to start with the desired outcomes and work backwards to determine the acceptable evidence and finally plan the instruction and activities. So as backward design has become a best practice in education, it was really our goal to integrate it into the IPARD cycle to produce projects that have a well-developed link to curriculum. So again, with backward design, the 3 steps are that you'll identify the desired results, determine acceptable evidence, and finally plan your learning experiences and instructions. So the result of merging backward design and IPARD, as I mentioned earlier, is the academically rigorous service learning unit plan. This is the template that you're going to want to be following as we move through the video today. So before we move into integrating investigation into the unit plan, I'm going to suggest that if you haven't already, please take a moment to pause the video and print the Academically Rigorous Service Learning Unit Plan and the K-12 Service Learning Standards for Quality Practice. Both of these documents can be found on the How to Create a Model Service Learning Unit group on the GSN. Okay, now that we're back and everybody has a copy of the unit plan in front of them, we're going to start off with section 1 of the template. The first part of stage 1 of the planner, which focuses on identifying the desired results, is broken into 2 parts: the content standards and the investigation. As the name implies, the content standards section is where you will identify the academic and civic content standards that you would like to cover in your unit. As you can also see, the link to curriculum standard is highlighted in this portion of the unit. That's because this is what really drives the standards in the curriculum of what you're teaching in the classroom as you plan your service learning unit. The second part of stage 1 is the investigation stage. This aligns directly to the investigation step in the I-PART cycle and allows us to highlight 3 of our K-12 standards, which are diversity, meaningful service, and youth voice. This is a really key component in increasing student engagement in the classroom and in coursework. It's also a great opportunity for you to develop the cultural competence of your teaching practice. In the investigation step, students and teachers investigate the community problems they might like to address. In order to meet the diversity, youth voice, and meaningful service standards, try framing your investigation in an assets-based fashion by first identifying what the community and students have to offer, understanding what area the students are interested in exploring, identifying areas of need, and researching the topic areas within the community and from multiple perspectives. So as our agenda mentioned, where you place the investigation step can often be up for debate in the academic field. My suggestion is that you choose where you're going to place this based on your level of experience with the content, grade, and community in which you teach. So for example, if you're new to a grade or to a subject area, or you are just transitioning to a new school community, you might want to plan the investigation step prior to setting your desired results for the unit. This is a great beginning to the school year activity. It's a good way to get your elementary and middle school students involved through going out into the community, going on a community walk, engaging in a discussion. You really want your students to think about what is happening in their community, what the community has to offer, what areas they might like to improve upon, and how they can gain information on this specified need. It's a great way for you also to set up an authentically engaging experience and really model that assets-based focus for your classroom and community. So if you're an experienced teacher with an in-depth understanding of the subject matter, you may be able to identify universal themes that are easily adapted to multiple community needs. So for example, when I was teaching 5th grade in Minnesota, I knew that one of the science standards that we focused on was understanding the scientific method. This was a power standard. We focused on it every year. Knowing that, I also knew that the scientific method was a really adaptable concept, so I could apply it in the standards that the students needed to meet to a variety of subjects in the scientific field. So knowing this, I could easily plan my overarching desired results prior to working with my students to identify the service project. And then we could kind of guide our investigation steps to align with these outcomes. So if we take that perspective, let's walk through how we would start to use this portion of the tool and integrate the standards. So using the example of 5th grade science, I've pulled some of the standards from the Minnesota State Standard Science curriculum. So looking at these standards, and when we're identifying our desired results, you're going to want to incorporate both the civic and academic standards. I've only pulled academic standards here because civic standards can often tend to shift from school to school. So looking above, when you begin to plan your project, you're going to want to pull the grade level standards that are appropriate and use those to determine the overall big ideas for the unit. You're really going to want to focus on what we call the standard or the strand in this case, and not the benchmarks, which you're going to use later to flesh out the knowledge, skills, and understandings that students would need to gain. So in this example, we've focused on the standard that states science is a way of knowing about the natural world. It's done by individuals and groups and is characterized by empirical criteria, logical argument, and skeptical review. I've also chosen to incorporate some of the common core standards for writing and speaking and listening. Because of the developmental nature of the Common Core standards, they're actually quite easily adaptable to service learning unit plans. Here, the selected standards are linked to the skills students would need when writing up a science lab and/or presenting their findings out to the larger community. So these can be utilized in a really practical way when you're engaging students in service because they're going to hit on that real-world knowledge and context. So we're going to take a quick minute to pause and prepare. So if you want to hit pause on your video and explore the following questions. 1, would you like to begin with the investigation step, or would you prefer to select your curriculum standards first? And if so, what academic and civic standards do you plan on focusing on in your unit? All right, now that we've thought a little bit about what standards we'd like to focus on, we're going to start looking at your big ideas. So in the first part of the unit planner, you're going to focus on writing your big ideas. And I know that big ideas can often be a challenging place for people to start, so if you need some help with writing the big ideas and you're looking at a content-specific area like social studies or science, you can actually go to our GSN discussion group, and there are some links to the national curriculum that has big ideas for these 2 subject areas. I know that's always a really helpful reference point for me when I'm planning. So the 2 ideas that we've chosen to focus on for this unit are that scientific explanations, theories, and models are those that best fit the facts known at a particular time. And that's actually pulled directly from the National Science Curriculum Big Ideas. And the second one is more tailored to our specific grade level and content area, which states the scientific method is one way of gaining understanding through the evaluation of evidence, logical argument, and critical questioning. All right, and after you've drafted your big ideas, the next step in the planning process is to craft your essential questions. You want to remember that these questions will drive the inquiry throughout the unit, and they should be explicit and referenced often. It's often a good idea to refer back to the standards and benchmark you use to plan and develop your essential questions. So if we look back at the Minnesota Grade 5 Science Standards, one way that I can pull out the essential questions is to refer to the benchmarks more specifically. And I'm going to want to look at each benchmark and then think about what questions will students need to be able to answer in order to demonstrate these skills. So drawing from those 4 benchmarks, some of the essential questions we produced for this unit are: how can we best measure what we can't see? How can you determine your experiment is replicable? How do you determine if a scientific claim is valid? And what do inconsistencies in data tell you? On page 3, you will find the last part of the desired results section, which is identifying knowledge, skills, and understandings. This is where you're going to break out all of the things that students will need to know, be able to do, and understand in order to respond to the essential questions and understand the big idea. All right, so we're going to take another minute to pause and prepare. So assuming that you've identified your standards, you want to take some time to think about the big ideas that unite those standards, and what essential questions will you use to drive student understanding. Coming back, take a minute to check your work and think about if your big ideas transition across grade levels, and if your essential questions are open-ended and intended to reoccur. So will you be able to use them at multiple points throughout the unit and still drive new knowledge and new inquiry? All right, so after completing the investigation phase and identifying our desired results, along with setting our big ideas and our essential questions, we're going to want to move into the assessment portion. So when you incorporate the investigation, desired results, and knowledge, understanding, and skills, you're going to come up with your formative and summative assessments. So let's say that my 5th graders identified water conservation as their important community need. Through observation and research in their schools and communities, they've noticed that the school's using far more water than necessary and negatively impacting our environment. By combining this area of investigation and meaningful service with the content defined in our desired results, I'm able to create a series of formative and summative assessment tasks that will develop the knowledge, skill, and understanding necessary for the students to reach their desired outcomes. On page 4 of the template, we determine acceptable evidence. This is where you will list and explain your formative and summative assessment tasks. So let's say that my summative assessment task is going to be to have students create a hypothesis about the most effective way students can reduce their water consumption at school, create an experiment to test their hypothesis, and present their findings to the class, where the 5th grade will then vote on which adaptation to implement at the school-wide level. In order to be able to complete the summative assessment task accurately, there are several smaller benchmark goals on which the students will first need to demonstrate mastery. You should list out each of your formative assessment tasks here. You can also notice that in this portion of the unit planner, you're really focusing on meaningful service, diversity through differentiation, and your link to curriculum. So when you're planning each of your formative assessment tasks, you're going to want to involve steps 2 through 4 of the IPART cycle. If one of my formative assessment tasks, let's say, is to evaluate if students can accurately collect and analyze data, which will be necessary for them to perform their summative assessment task, I'm going to want to prepare a service learning opportunity that maps to that specific skill set. The service learning opportunity in this case could be that students will determine the average amount of water consumption for students washing their hands at school. It's hands-on, it's an interactive process, and I can use this either as the activity for teaching the strategy, or I can use it as the formative assessment itself after having covered the curriculum content in class. Upon completing the formative assessment, the students and the teacher are going to reflect on the experience, determine the level of mastery and if reteaching is necessary, and proceed accordingly. So steps 2 through 4 should be repeated for each formative assessment in the unit, with the ideal result being that each skill set is used in a real-world context applicable to the project. And take another quick minute to pause and prepare and really kind of get our bearings with the template. This time I'd like you to think about what your summative assessment task will be, what formative assessments you'll need to plan through the unit to ensure students are mastering concepts. All right, so coming back, just to check on your work, do your summative and formative assessments link directly to your service? And do they ensure real-world application of curricular and character standards? All right, so we're moving into stage 3, which is the last stage of the unit planner. And this stage, along with steps 2 through 4 of the IPART cycle, because of its alignment with the formative assessments and the repetition, is really where you're going to see the K-12 standards stand out. All of the standards are addressed in stage 3, and it's the part of the unit planner where you're going to give a brief summary of the learning, service, and reflection activities in your unit. So you can decide how you really want to use this section of the unit plan. Either you can use it to plan your lessons directly, or you can attach a lesson plan format that's perhaps used in your school or institution right into this segment of the plan. Either way, you're going to want to make sure that as you plan out your lessons, you're going to want to see if they match steps 2 through 4 of the IPART cycle. So starting off with section 2, the preparation phase, you're going to want to focus on diversity linked to curriculum and youth voice. This is your chance to really make sure that you're incorporating multiple perspectives, that you're differentiating the content, the process, and the assessment, and also that you're tracking toward your learning objectives and using student voice to guide your service learning planning. As you move into stage 3, which is the action step, you're going to want to focus on developing community partnerships, engaging in hands-on meaningful service, and adjusting the duration and intensity of each formative assessment module to ensure that all students are at mastery. And finally, in stage 4, the reflection stage, both you and your students are going to want to use reflection as a progress monitoring strategy to help you evaluate your progress toward the learning objectives. This is the point of the formative assessment model where you'll decide to continue on, reteach a particular concept, or change course to meet your learning objectives. And take one more quick pause and prepare break, where you're going to be thinking about what lessons and service activities you'll use to ensure that students are prepared for their formative assessments. How will you integrate reflection into these activities? Coming back, you're going to want to check your work by asking if you've differentiated your lessons and service for process and content. Do your students have an opportunity to guide the decision-making process and provide feedback? And also, how have you involved your community partners in these activities? So once you have completed all of your formative assessment cycles to mastery, it's time to complete your summative assessment and celebrate your accomplishments. As we mentioned a little bit earlier in the video, step 5, the demonstrate and celebrate step, is where you're going to place the summative assessment. So in the case of our water conservation unit, step 5 would include completing our final project, sharing our results with the class and the school, and celebrating our accomplishments through an award ceremony. Finally, we would use the understanding that we've gained from our experience to sustain our commitment to the highlighted need and to work to develop deeper investigations into the root cause of the water shortage. These are two great areas for you to focus on the Youth Voice Standard and also to create a link to future meaningful service. Once you've completed the unit planner, it's time to assess your planning and to ensure that you've met all of the K-12 standards for high-quality service learning. What we've got on the screen is a snapshot of the Level 4 criteria for the first 4 standards. Each of these descriptors, along with levels 1 through 3, can be found in the GSN Self-Assessment Guide for Service Learning Projects, which is also posted on the GSN group mentioned earlier. What you're going to want to do is to use this guide to review each section of your unit planner and measure the learning, activities, and service items and see how they compare to the rubric, with a goal of being at the level of 3 to 4 for each area. You can also use this rubric as part of your reflection after you've completed a unit. This is going to help you to highlight areas of strength and growth in the unit plan, as well as to identify opportunities for sustained service learning instruction. So for our last pause and prepare moment during the video, take a quick minute to think about how your summative assessments will be visible to others and in what way you'll showcase and celebrate your success. Are there any additional ways that you can grow your service learning project, either throughout the year, across grade levels, or across content areas? All right, coming back, did your summative assessment or the presentation of your summative assessment involve all of your community partners? And how was Youth Voice integrated into the planning, celebration, and critiquing of the unit, as well as into planning for further exploration? All right, so after you've finished creating your unit, or if you're at any point in the process, we'd like to invite you to join us on the GSN. We have a group entitled How to Create a Model Service Learning Unit that's designed specifically for those people who either went through the first webinar version of this presentation or who have viewed the video and are currently working on writing a service learning unit. On the GSN, you'll find all of the resources that were mentioned in this video today, as well as have the opportunity to post questions to a group of other teachers if you're struggling with any area in your service learning unit plan, or to share unit plans with others. So please find us there. You'll see the link on the next slide. Thanks, and have a great day.